I don't agree with the statement that Sunbreak SwitchX is peak SwitchX, and I always wanted to make a dedicated video about
I'm back.
issues with this. The three biggest issues I have with Sunbreak's iteration of the SwitchX are its neglect for X mode,
What are you watching?
management of switch gauge and end state, as well as the undermining of X mode's role as the mobility/utility part of the weapon, though arguably this issue is an extension of the first one.
No, we don't do that here. You don't do that here. You don't do that here. And you don't do that here either. Before we start picking some individual arguments apart, there is no beef. And I don't hate this video. Quite the opposite, actually. On to the picking.
The damage you receive is still pretty noticeable, and the damage you deal is kinda lackluster. An okay move at best.
I don't like Invincible Gambit, like, at all. Thanks to people like Juzzy, however, I no longer resent its existence, I merely dislike it. The key to Invincible Gambit's utility is in this sentence.
The damage you receive is still pretty noticeable.
A good and genuine use case for Imbecile Gamba is moving along with the monster while also getting Blood Blight.
That is all X mode itself has to offer in Sunbreak. One wirebug move that is decent at best, and the file bursts from end state, which don't really help it in the long run.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Casually speaking, that is correct. Strictly correct. Axe mode in both Base Rise and Sunbreak offers purely utility options. Most of that is movement speed, which he goes on to rightfully mention at some point, but also forward, forward overhead, and fade slash. Tight positioning in Monster Hunter just is not very important at a casual level. Axe mode feeling unimportant stems overwhelmingly from the players that complain about that never having been pushed or pushing themselves into situations where those tools actually and actively shine, optimally speaking. That is no front. I don't blame anyone for enjoying a product they paid their own good money for and spent their own rare free time on in a fashion that is different than what I enjoy, and I implore you to have that same stance. But what do positioning and utility actually mean here? Well, positioning describes the act of getting into or consistently being at a position that furthers your game plan and/or end goal. Positioning can be used to bait certain monster attacks, like cone baiting and Iceborne, avoid taking damage, like the many examples of monsters' blind spots, or using movement tools to get a counter off you otherwise wouldn't. My hot take is that Axe mode is not neglected, but that Monster Hunter as a whole has never been casually difficult enough to make the average player look into and enjoy those higher skill concepts. The Invincible Gambit argument is essentially the same. It does have strong use cases, but the broad player base is and should never be forced to engage with that level of optimization to get a good experience out of their game time. Let's move on to the meters and gauges section.
Then sword mode. You don't have to deal with the poor mobility of sword mode and don't need to actively morph back to X mode like in previous iterations to get your mobility back.
Isolated, this is true. In the context of even making those tools accessible to yourself in a hunt, you're missing out on other, usually more optimal things. The ad absurdum argument here is that monster draws don't matter, because you can slot earplugs. It's a similarly true statement in isolation, but the opportunity cost is more obvious in this example. The rule of thumb I went by while Sunbreak was current and the most active was that any bug not spent on EBC is a wasted bug. That's not always true, but it's true enough, often enough, that unless you want to hone in on a particular playstyle, or optimize for a time, or generically get better at swaxe, you can adhere to that statement. For the sake of completeness, I should add that most of the optimizations I know and care about are within the context of solo play. In multiplayer, things behave a little bit differently simply because within Monster Hunter we strictly don't have good and consistent aggression management tools. Whether we get opportunities to use certain moves or skills properly hinges on either RNG or very coordinated play with others.
But okay, let's say you actually use enough switch gauge to drop underneath the morphing threshold and can't access the switch charger right now. Do you now have to use X mode like in previous iterations?
Put a pin in that clip, we'll get back to it shortly.
No, of course not, because we have the 2-stage morph slash. It lets you enter sword mode even below the morphing threshold, builds a huge chunk of amp meter, and the second stage, the morph back to X mode, refills a decent amount of switch gauge.
It's actually the other way around. The first bit of 2-stage, which I lovingly refer to as 1-stage because EBC exists, gives sword gauge, and the final axe hit builds amp instead. I'm reading that as an honest mistake, because from a design perspective it probably should work the other way around, so I can't exactly fault anyone for making that oopsie. I'm really highlighting this for two reasons. One, it's the only immediate and glaring instance of being wrong I've found, which is significantly better than most videos on Monster Hunter I've seen, some of my own included. And two, everyone makes mistakes, and that's fine, myself included. I posted my opinion on the internet, and look how that went.
Another incredible move, which I really like,
Same.
but it is once again only benefiting sword mode.
Bloody here goes on and says more words, but I'm not pausing to disagree with the statement itself. I'm disagreeing with the notion that Ricebreak particularly cares about sword mode at all. Most iterations of Switch Axe have their own, sometimes vague, identity. Ricebreak's version doesn't really want to be in sword, and it doesn't really want to be an axe either. They're all just means to an end to it. While he's technically correct here in that 2-stage benefits sword mode more than axe, I am of the opinion that that's a much smaller deal than it sounds like. Both sword and axe do find a place for almost every single move they have, if you care to look deeply enough at an optimal level. Except compressed finishing discharge.
And last but not least, the elemental burst counter. Costing 2 wire bucks and draining your switch gauge very quickly, which punishes mistimed counters, it deals a ridiculous amount of damage and instantly puts you into amp state.
Absolutely correct. I'd just like to add 2 other fun facts about EBC that somehow make it even stronger. For one, not only does EBC get us amped in one smooth motion that, excuse my French, defeque de dégâts, it also refreshes the amp timer. Fun fact number 2 is that it additionally ignores the sword gauge and forces us into sword mode, exactly like the first morph of 2-stage does, except it does it even faster. Unlike 2-stage, this doesn't count as a morph attack, which means it doesn't benefit from file switch boost for the better.
It takes some skill to maintain switch gauge and keep sword mode active as much as possible. Miss your spiral burst? Well, you have the better mobility of X mode and the whole X mode moveset to stay aggressive and regain the switch gauge actively, instead of having to wait for it to fill back up for you, like in most past games, or press a button to refill it quickly that also avoids attacks and relocates you.
This is exactly what I mean when I say that this video is casually correct. According to every Surface guide, from videos to mass-produced text ones, to even the in-game guides and the guide pamphlet from inside the case, this statement reflects that same information. And once again, it is technically correct. Every guide I publish, every word of advice I give on whatever I talk about is intended to help bring whoever finds it to a more complete understanding. Let's put a pin in this one too. I promise I'll get back to both of these.
In Wilds we now have Rising Slash and Triple Slash as the top dog for sustained DPS.
This is a new feeling. Pride in someone else.
This is such an important distinction to make, and it makes me happy to see that Bloody made the active choice to make and clarify that distinction.
And I swear to GOG, if anybody tells me, bruh, just let people play however they want, if they want to use X mode they can, I hope you're new here, because that exact thing is basically what I always preach, especially ever since the full release fiasco with wilds. Play the weapon how it is the most fun to you. If at the end of your hunt it says quest cleared, you did a good job and you succeeded.
He goes on to say he understands that it sucks when your favorite playstyle is suboptimal, which is true. I have seen the argument one too many times that allegedly, given the chance, players will optimize the fun out of a video game. I disagree viscerally with that statement. If I can optimize the fun out of your game, you've made a worse version of Cookie Clicker. I'm saying that because this video is not the beef you might initially have looked for, but I also didn't want to let you down without giving you something you can also get viscerally angry over. Happy help. A lot of this video is lamenting how numerically bad and at best situational Axe mode is, and I understand him to say that Wiles is the most complete feeling version of swaxe, because Axe mode has a much more pronounced use case here. I don't want to put words in people's mouths that weren't actually said, however. So do please watch his video as well if you haven't already. Let's talk a little bit about how Switch Axe, as it has been designed originally, actually works. Swaxe has two modes and a way to transition between them. Axe mode is the more mobile but weaker one, where sword mode is more stationary but also stronger. You already know this. What I want you to do now is zoom out a little. Sword is the spender mode. Early iterations of Switch Axe didn't have a gainer in the traditional sense. If you replace sword gauge with mana, you literally have old school JRPG mages, where Axe mode is the ploinky staff melee attack you only use if you have zero other options. For decades, the going advice was Axe mode is good for cutting tails and reaching higher parts, and that usually refers to the upswing we had. I would like to apologize for my consistent, perpetual lack of judgment, because I used to say the same thing. Breaking parts and cutting tails is the direct result of dealing enough damage to meet the threshold for that part. What kind of damage do we expect with an upswing motion value of 25? Overhead slash is the move of choice here for a whopping 54 MV. About those pins we put in, as long as we are below the morph threshold, we can manually reload. That reload is front loaded, which means the gauge refilling happens before the animation even plays out, and it coincidentally also provides absolutely no hyper armor. This is a very fortunate set of circumstances, because it allowed damage-oriented swaxe enjoyers to optimize these reloads. You can cancel the reload animation by eating chip damage from small monsters, or from the walking or turning animation of large monsters, or even blow yourself up. Raws during which you can't hit a good hit zone. Particularly Devil Joe is guilty of that. Tremors, and starting in 4, even ledges were used to cancel the reload animation and get back to sword mode faster. This was the main way most even remotely optimization oriented swaxe mains, at least the ones I knew and myself included, would play this weapon. Axe mode hasn't had a genuine use outside of exactly overhead slash during sword downtime in those days. The optimization scene back then was, naturally, a lot smaller, so a lot of that knowledge and skill is, by definition, rather obscure. Generations marked a paradigm shift for that, by completely obsoleting Axe mode because of the instant refill, permanent sword gauge hunter arts combo. Ever since then, with the exception of exactly base world, so far swaxe had some mechanism to ignore sword gauge, which means that we were really only ever forced into it if we did something wrong or didn't juggle our gauges correctly. Iceborne's Clutch Claw ZSD doesn't care about your gauge. Base Rise gave us Switch Charger, which made gauge ignorable. Sunbreak gave us 2-stage and EBC, which mostly ignore gauge, and Wilds gave us Focus Strike, which can also force sword mode and also lead to a refill. Ever since Generations, we also stopped competing for the worst actualized DPS in the games. In 4 Ultimate, within the context of the TA rule set of the time, on level 140 guild quests, swaxe has 11 runs that are vaguely in the middle of the pack, 4 times that are the 3rd slowest, and 8 runs that are the 2nd slowest across all weapon types. Never again have we seen such despair in a weapon that has 0 built-in defensive tools, except Horn. Let's look again at these modes and theorize a little. Swaxe has an axe and a sword mode. Both of those feel and play different and can contribute to their own playstyle. I'm bad at naming things, so let's go with sword-centric and axe-centric. Switch-axe can switch, or morph, between these two, which allows for a 3rd basic morph-centric playstyle. Sword mode is the one that consumes resources, and in modern games is the one that requires resources to reach its full potential. Making axe mode better numerically would be completely counterproductive to the whole design this weapon wants to have. Similarly, a significantly stronger sword mode, as we've seen over the last God knows how many years, eliminates the use of axe at an optimal enough level. I'm glad I don't need to make the decision on how swaxe is designed and numbered, and thankful that I can comfortably play armchair game dev instead. That said, I don't think a wild buffing of axe mode should occur. Not because I want axe to suck, but because it wouldn't really change anything. Do you want a best immoral, unlikable switch axe build, greatsword cheap optimal 1 gigajillion DPS build? Or the serviceable comfy switch axe setups? Similarly, you generally speaking don't want the good enough workable niche situational fun combo thing that sometimes work. You want the best swaxe combo. Both of those use are not you, current viewer, enjoyer of content, but a general face and nameless blob of people that don't want to critically engage with things like this. And that you blob is ultimately who pays the bills for Capcom. Even if I am wrong about that, even if more people were interested in the funny niche, sometimes occasionally useful but mostly fun playstyles, I still don't think blanket buffing axe would help anything, and that is entirely related to how I think about switch axe as a whole. Similar to BW here, I started in Try and have mained switch axe since. I vividly remember one encounter with a greatsword player back on a fateful day. He had a hunter rank somewhere between 72 and 113 if I recall correctly, and introduced himself as a veteran. I watched him play greatsword from the corner of my eye and learned something that sticks with me to this day. Dude played combo GS in Try. Anyone self-identifying as a veteran is clocked by me as a clown since that day. And while it's easy to clown on the playstyle, having gone back to even earlier titles myself, I understand where it came from. GS didn't always have charges, so that hunter was just stuck in an earlier time and game with what he wanted to experience or knew how to do. Ever since World, I think of swaxe the same way. Splitting axe from sword is often necessary to describe the many buttons this weapon has, but doesn't actually serve a purpose outside of that explanatory context. I wholeheartedly believe we should abandon that notion altogether and instead look at combo paths, options and tools we particularly enjoy or dislike, because modern switch axe is an extremely free-form, flow-state weapon type with a ton of interweaving combo paths. And from that point of view, I would like to insert myself into the conversation of which iteration is the best. Every single iteration of switch axe has at least one thing I love about it and at least one thing I dislike about it. The choice of best or favorite for me boils down to which version represents the power fantasy I attach to swaxe the most. That fantasy is, as I've said on record, nah, I'd win, which for me unfolds into actively seeking out danger to stand in, tight and fast positioning, and comical levels of aggression in a sustained onslaught of attacks. Rise and Sunbreak both fill that role for me very well, and so does Try, despite its numerical shortcomings. Wilds has a more whimsical approach to it. I love swordplay, and the little tippy-tap dance we do with rising slashes is awesome. Unfortunately, there can only be one most favorite and bestest iteration of swaxe, and that is... Overall, I quite liked this video by Bloody Wyverian. Originally, I watched for like 3 minutes and got viscerally angry at my perception of Axe Mode bad, but after some reflecting, reaching out to the man himself and a lovely chat, I understand his point of view much better and genuinely hope I successfully added to it. I've wanted to talk about the fundamental design issues swaxe has and some more conceptual, well, concepts for a long time now. And this video has given me the final kick in the butt to dip my feet into that. So thank you Bloody for making it. Thank you for watching this and hopefully his video. And oh right, my favorite swaxe is Sinister Saints and the singular best iteration is Extreme Swaxe F.